Hello and welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. We're going to be joined by Sean Duca, the Vice President, Regional Chief Security Officer for the Asia Pacific and Japan region with Palo Alto Networks. And Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 released their 2021 Ransomware Threat Report yesterday. Some very interesting findings and some big payments being made too in ransomware. So looking forward to speaking to Sean. Coming up now is Sean Duca. And Sean, we've had you on previously. Thanks for signing in, mate. I was a little bit worried we might have lost you there. So we're going to be diving into the Palo Alto Networks Ransomware Threat Report 2021. And you're the Vice President, Regional Chief Security Officer for APJ. And you've had that role for some time. I was thinking earlier. So yeah, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Just talk us through some of the key findings, because even when I was writing up the notes, it's pretty impressive in terms of some of the payments. So we'll sort of deal with what they've been paying and what they're making. I think we're in the wrong business, but maybe then we'll talk about how companies should be dealing with this, because it sounds like companies have been dipping their hands in their pockets and paying ransomware, paying ransoms.
Look, I think from the beginning of time, there's no sort of a cybercriminal's not going to sort of really hang around if there is no money to be made. And I think what they've actually found is ransomware is actually quite lucrative and has been quite lucrative for them for a number of years. And people have been paying. If I think about the last year, specifically around sort of the COVID-19 during the sort of the pandemic itself, what we saw was the average ransom paid by an organization has dramatically increased. So 2019, we were sitting somewhere in the order of about $115,000 US was typically the sort of the ransom. In 2020, that's now sort of gone up to $312,000. So 171% year-on-year growth, just simply from the ransomware itself, the ransom payments. Obviously, we're seeing organizations, in terms of the ransom that's being paid by organizations, that's also doubled from 5 million to 10 million. And you've even got some instances where the Maze ransomware, as an example, we saw demands in 2020 actually averaging somewhere around the $4.8 million just for that particular ransomware threat. Now, I guess the question, or sort of the point that you're sort of making around, are people putting their hands in their pockets and paying? I don't see why, for a second, that people are not paying, because there's no reason why the ransomware would be going, or the ransom payments would be going up. Why we're seeing more and more ransomware threats that are actually sort of popping up. And if you think about the year that we've actually had, we're seeing a lot of different people that are working remotely. We're seeing the ransomware threats themselves leveraging the RDP protocol, so the remote desktop protocol, and are really trying to get in through there. And sometimes we're even seeing that, double extortion is a new type of tactic that's actually being used. So if you think about it, ransomware is all about how do I get inside an organization? How do I search and hunt for those particular files that could be of value?
Yeah.
Let's just say anything that's a doc, XLS file, I'm going to go off and actually encrypt those files. I then drop a ransom note on your desktop and say, hey, Chris, you've got 72 hours to pay the sum of, let's say, $100,000 in convertible Bitcoin currency. The clock starts ticking. And what they're doing with double extortion is, before they actually go through the process of encrypting the data, they're actually taking a backup copy of it. So if you want to think about, like me, forcing the situation to say you really want to think about paying, this is where they're doing it, where they're saying, if you don't pay, and some organizations, thank God some people are actually saying, I'm not going to pay, because that's effectively feeding the beast and they're going to come back again.
Yeah.
But they're basically just saying, I've got your data now, and I'm either going to sell it on the dark web, or I'm just going to simply dox an organization and just simply publish it and just sort of release it there. We've seen that happen. I've even seen some instances where some people have gone in. One particular organization, I saw that 5,400 workstations and about, there was 144 servers, all basically had RDP connections that were actually being sold on the dark web as well. So they're looking to find out how they monetize all of this. And, that hasn't changed. I think what we've seen that last year is, obviously with the pandemic, healthcare organizations are definitely in the crosshairs. So we're just seeing this really sort of escalating and ramping up quite a bit.
Talk us through some of the numbers, the highest paid, and some of the numbers have tripled. So there's as you say, they wouldn't be doing it unless they're making money, but it seems that companies are just getting caught by surprise and are literally paying that money. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Maybe just talk us through the variants. There's in the report here, there's 20 top ransomware variants. and how effective they are? Because you talked about sort of 100 odd servers and the like, and the workstations, but are they clever enough to get down to sort of the crown jewels files as well, where they might not take you offline, but they've taken some very sensitive commercial information, or potentially not just disruptive, but embarrassing information as well, and you move into that sort of extortion aspect of it as well. So
Yeah.
let's start with maybe just the variance, and then how much control they can get once they're into a network.
Yeah, so look, in terms of the ransomware families that we've seen I'll use Australia as an example. The most common ones that we've typically seen here are threats called Nephilim, Netwalker, and Sodunokbi, which are kind of like some of the big ones. But Netwalker by far, I think, is probably the biggest one that we've seen in Australia. If you break it down into the industries that we've seen in Australia, sort of the top of the pile is definitely healthcare. And then the ones that start to sort of say, even playing field is definitely around construction, professional and legal services, telecommunications, transport, and wholesale and retail. So just those industries alone, that's enough to kind of make and break most countries, really. So we're seeing those threats really sort of popping up. They're targeting industries. And that's probably another thing that really changed in the last year. They're being very targeted. It's not simply a case of, let's just do the whole, typical cybercrime approach of, cast my net as far and wide as I possibly can and hope for the best. But they're actually starting to say, let's be very targeted as to who we're actually going to be sort of launching these attacks at. Overseas, we definitely saw that big name brands were kind of the plate du jour, so to speak, for cyber criminals, where they're just going for the people that have got big brands, big notoriety, more than likely they've got deep pockets, and they're the ones that they're sort of really going for.
So you do find it's becoming more targeted. It's, talking to Sam there, the botnets are sort of out there hunting and doing their work anyway, but the ransomware is becoming, sort of attached to that spear phishing approach. We saw a Melbourne hospital sort of taken offline yesterday as well. Yep. I haven't looked at the details of that, but, it sounds like a ransomware or at least a breach, but for them to stop their systems, something serious has happened. And you talked about healthcare. What are some of the motivations on that? I mean, would you find that sort of the health systems are involved in the sort of the payment process as well? And let's talk it from the end user's perspective. What are their options on this once they've got that threat, or once they've got that message to say, we've got your files, or your system's not working anymore, but we can help you out, but you're going to have to pay?
Yeah, look, I think for me, if I was to think about why would sort of healthcare be targeted? Just purely from the pandemic, they need to be always up and running. They need to be constantly there, and it's something that we're sort of dependent on. And literally, it's a life or death situation. Cybercriminals have basically got sort of no mercy in that aspect of let's just actually target them. In terms of who is or isn't paying, I think it's impossible to actually sort of say that absolutely they're the ones that are sort of feeding or filling up the coffers type of thing for a cyber criminal. I think it's just more a case of they know that they are actually sort of beholden to the fact that they need their systems up and running. Take the example, I think there was a hospital in Eastern Europe, I'm trying to think of the country in particular, where sort of the patient admission systems actually went down because due to ransomware. And someone was actually sort of trying to be admitted to the hospital, they couldn't, and the patient ended up dying. And they're basically saying this is the first time that we've seen a death actually due to ransomware. So we're starting to see that, cyber criminals have got sort of they're not sitting there thinking, oh, let's just, stay away from healthcare organizations because they're the ones that are really trying to sort of, get on top of the pandemic that's out there. They don't care. For them, it's just more a case of there's money to be made, and I'm going to go off and actually sort of go get that money and get it from people that probably need their systems up and running. I saw of a negotiation that was taking place, a ransom negotiation that was taking place with a company that was basically saying, we've literally lost everything due to the pandemic, the revenues are not there. And they just said, that's great, thank you, but please pay the money. So,
well, there's been a lot of not-for-profits have been hit too. I think one was a woman's refuge, and they lost millions of dollars. And going back to Jane Lowe's podcast we just did with Chainalysis in the US, the cryptocurrency and the money laundering in cryptocurrency reached a peak in 2020 as well. So, this is all very much related. And there is no good news in this, other than if you're in the cybersecurity sector, I'm just looking at NetWalker here. You mentioned January to January, leaked data from 113 victim organisations globally, fast surpassing other ransomware families. Ragnar Locker was second, leaking data from 26 victims. And also worth noting that the US Department of Justice announced in January it had coordinated international law enforcement action to disrupt the NetWalker ransomware gang. Now, I suppose this is where the other sort of mitigation to this is where law enforcement and national security agencies are coming in, because you mentioned we're starting to see sort of related deaths, and this is critical infrastructure, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we've got hospitals in Melbourne falling over. Where is the mitigation and sort of the counter operations taking place? And does this report cover that? I haven't found that in this report.
So the report sort of touches on a couple of things in terms of sort of recommendations of what we need to do to sort of get ahead of the curve. And look, I think like everything, number one, we should not be thinking for a second that these types of threats are not going to be targeting us. We're as if they're going to touch us. I'm sure many hospitals probably thought the same thing as well. Healthcare organisations thought, surely they don't have, they're not spineless in the sense. Cybercriminals does not think like that. Yep. They're looking at the payday at the end of the day. So I think for starters, let's actually sort of break that notion that everyone is a target and everyone potentially could actually be susceptible to this. And I always think about it in the sense of let's actually plan for this day. And it's analogous to everyone's. I'm sure that I've probably used this 100 times in our conversations between you and I. No one ever picks their team the day of the game. Yep. So let's actually plan for that day today. So you really want to start to sort of work that one out and actually go through and start to work out, one, what actually happens? How could this change? What would we actually do? Because sitting around a boardroom table or even over a sort of a Zoom call and you're sitting there with your executive leadership team, you actually want to ask the question, say, would we actually pay? How would we even do it if we did pay? Look, I'm not sort of condoning the fact that you should be paying, but I also just sit there and say, you really want to think about it. That's not your easy way out, because paying, there's a couple of downsides to that. One, you're actually potentially feeding a criminal organisation, could be funding terrorism as well. But the second part to that one is there's no guarantees. Like you're actually dealing with a cyber criminal. Now, the whole business model falls over if people don't pay. But the infrastructure could be taken down. There's no way for them to even provide you with the key to unlock your data. So what happens then? So I think we always got to think about it that how do we actually protect ourselves? If someone was going to try and take a copy of your data and release it, no doubt there's going to be something of a sensitive nature there. I'm sure if someone actually dumped all of your messages out of Exchange, that's probably going to be quite embarrassing for any organisation. So again, we're going to start to think about those types of things. But then at the same time, majority of the times they're looking at vulnerabilities and weaknesses that exist. Granted, they only need to be right once. Our job is we need to be right all the time. But we need to be thinking about, okay, how do we shore up our defences? I've never seen an organisation that was completely patched and up to date and was running the latest and greatest really get compromised. Yep. If I think about organisations that have been hit, they typically get hit the second time around again because they haven't actually taken the time to go through the process of shoring up their defences again. And it's not just simply the technology. Obviously, the technology needs to ensure that we can catch up and keep up with the latest and greatest threats that are out there. But at the same time, the people in the process, do we have the right people in place to ensure that we can deal with this? During the pandemic, if you think about it, a couple of days ago marks the 1 year where many companies basically sent all of their staff home and we started working remotely. Have I actually bothered to look at my processes and how we could start to, manage an incident remotely? I'm sure that many people tested this way and probably got tested. Let's test it again. 1 year on, we should be going through this process all the time.
We do. I mean, we run roundtables as well with CISOs and heads of security, and they're all on it. But it's always the key word is a journey, and because you can't be there, you can't be 100% all the time. So you do have these programs, and as you say, it is about preparing, and you've got to prepare the whole organisation, potentially the board. As well, and just be there doing. It's an ongoing process of that maturity and hygiene. Maybe just talk us through the sort of the recent impacts that you've been seeing here in the region as well. Slightly off topic, but you mentioned the Exchange there as well, and some of the sort of the related, because you'd see the threat actors jump on once that Exchange and the CVEs were out. It spiked. that's obviously related, because once they can get access, they can get that information, then they hit you with a ransomware. It's pretty much they have their own playbook. You need your own playbook back. What are you seeing? There's a good map in the report. Japan's about 9% of the percentage of total victim organisations, and then Europe, Middle East, and Asia, they're 60%, 60 odd percent in the Americas. What are you seeing in the region here? You cover APJ, both Australia but also the region. Where do you find sort of most of the activity, and how mature organisations are in actually sort of dealing with this challenge?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I think that sliding scale sort of moves on a daily basis. I think in every country there's going to be mature and immature organisations or nascent organisations that are still trying to sort of work out what to do. I still have conversations with people where they think that everything's fine, everything's rosy, and the reality is, would you even know? Would you be able to sort of tell if something went wrong? And then if you think about the fast pace of, just take even sort of the Microsoft Exchange challenges that we've sort of seen for the last week or so now, the attacker is pivoting extremely fast, and sometimes faster than we can actually sort of go through our own playbooks to deal with it. We saw the exploitation taking place. We saw web shells actually being used. Now we're seeing ransomware actually taking place. So it's hard, and I'm not trying to say that it's not. I think a statistic that I saw the other day was, the year we're kind of at sort of pretty much just say halfway past March, so a couple of months into Q1, and we're already 12 0 days into the year. Last year, I think Google were tracking something like about 24 0 days.
Yeah, right.
So it's getting faster and faster, and that ultimately means that, not to say that we've lost control or anything like that, but we need to just start thinking about, how do I actually manage the risk at the end of the day? Is there a way that I can actually mitigate it? Is there a way that I can prevent sort of that initial access from taking place? And I think to sort of really go to the question that you sort of asked, I think some people in some of the more mature countries, obviously Australia being one of them, we're seeing a lot of activity. And I think that's not going to stop, and that threat is not going to sort of slow down. But it really does require us to sort of go back at the organisation to work out, okay, the initial access of how people are getting in, let's conduct some sort of proper patch management, a review of what's actually sort of going on in those organisations. We know that remote desktop services are really sort of being used. Are they being configured? Are they secured correctly? Backup and recovery. I spoke to an organisation that, they were an unfortunate victim. They didn't pay. Yet they were starting to go through and rolling out what's the most current backup they could use and restore, and it was something like about 9 months old. In a world that we're probably amassing, probably terabytes worth of data every day, that's a lot of data that we've actually lost. And why? Because we don't actually go through the process of checking the integrity of our backups that are actually out there. And then security controls, again, are we using them correctly? Are we thinking about the way the attacker is actually sort of using it as well, which is, they're going off and signing up these newly registered domains, and we're just simply blocking at sort of a high macro level anyone from going to a newly registered domain. Someone may turn around and go, oh, but we want to allow people to go wherever they want. If a domain was registered yesterday, I don't think I'd want any of my users to go to that website.
Yeah.
If you look at just COVID alone, so the first, in a 6-week period, pretty much at the start of the pandemic, 1.2 million newly registered domains popped up with either a COVID-19, virus, pandemic, some type of linkage to that one. And you sit there and go, sure, there was a thirst for information and knowledge, and we're going out there and trying to work out, everyone's trying to be a part-time epidemiologist to work out, let's understand the pandemic. Cybercriminals do this. They do this every single time. And if we just simply said, block anyone from going to a newly registered domain, you kind of, you're getting a couple of brownie points for that one straight away. You can start to mitigate some of these threats. But then ultimately look at the threats as well.
Well, I was going to say there's sort of two parts I want to sort of finish off. One is the future of ransomware. Yep. And again, we have kind of covered off that as well slightly previously. And then we'll sort of finish off with those sort of takeaways and recommendations. We kind of touched on backup and recovery process there is a critical one. But again, often it's a bit like insurance policy at the back. If you forget to renew it, then it's not until you actually bloody need it that it counts. But maybe let's talk about the future of ransomware. And I touched on it the other day with the darknets, and they have their own help desks and the like. And I think that's the other part of where companies probably are paying is they make it easy to pay. They walk them through the process. So it's not like it's a difficult, how do we set up a Bitcoin account? It's here's a how-to, step by step, and we'll help you along the way. And we have a translator if needed as well. Notice with Japan. So there's in the report here, the future of ransomware. Ransomware is a service model. How much, I don't know how much hands-on you've had, Sean, but Unit 42 certainly would have, monitoring the ransomware as a service model that's in the darknet area as well. And we see so many variants of that and what maybe law enforcement should be doing, because it's a whole market, it's a whole sort of sector and industry on its own.
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's I think the whole, let's just call it, the dark web, or sort of that whole sort of cottage industry has been around for a long time. That whole as a service model is definitely growing. And the reason is there's no point me starting a business, let's just call it a cybercrime business, or an enterprise where I'm actually doing everything start to finish. If I don't have the skill set, the time, the resource, the inclination to actually do some of this part, I can just go off and procure as a service. It's the same thing we do right now. Think about Airtasker is a great sort of example of that one. Can't be bothered getting up to actually go do some sort of guarding in the backyard. I'll just get someone else to do it for me. Don't have the time to actually program or do the delivery of my malware. Great, I'll just actually get a service to actually get it out there. So that's growing. And I think what cyber criminals are actually sort of learning is there's money to be made in each of these different things. So let's just actually sell it as a service.
Yeah.
So I could be the complete novice, have no idea, but I just think it's pretty cool. When I start seeing numbers of 171% year-on-year growth in the ransoms out there, well, I want it as well. So, why would you not? And there's going to always be a market for someone out there to try and sell that. So that's growing, and it has been growing for some time now.
Well, and as again, it's something that's come up a number of times over the last few weeks, that 2020 and it looks like 2021 is going to continue that trend. As this report points out, there's almost been a tripling of payments funds as well. We're also going to see an increase in variance in those capabilities and more to adopt the double extortion. Maybe just finish off with, not so much finish off, but maybe just cover that double extortion aspects as well. I'm just going to read this bit, Sean. At least 16 different ransomware variants are now threatening to expose data or utilising leak sites, and more variants will likely continue this trend. Are we seeing that there were seven leaks from in Australia noted for 2020? Are we seeing this much in Australia, or do you think it's something that will likely to increase more? Or have you seen it here yet?
So I haven't heard of any instances locally where that's actually sort of happened, but I don't see why we would be immune to not seeing it either. So I think it's definitely going to sort of grow. And, if I was to think about it from a cyber criminal sort of mindset, it's just kind of like a guarantee. It's a bit of a backup plan. If you're not going to pay because I've actually encrypted your data, I bet if I stole your data and I went to sell it, you'd probably end up paying. So that would be the mindset that someone's going to have. So it would make sense to say that that's ultimately going to increase, and there's no reason why Australia would be immune to that.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's just walk through some of the key recommendations, particularly for those that are listening, or we might do a little takeaway, but the report sort of outlines about only 3 or 4, but the initial access is one. Maybe just talk us through that one.
Yeah, so from an initial access standpoint, obviously we're still seeing things coming through email as an example. So whether it's being lured to a particular link, an attachment's actually there, and we're just waiting for someone to actually sort of double click on that attachment. Hopefully we've actually tried to solve that. But then as we start to expose more things to the internet, remote desktop services is probably a great example of that one. People are putting things out in public cloud infrastructure and not really thinking about securing it the same way they probably secure it in an on-premise environment. And again, I still have conversations today with people that they think there's that shared responsibility model is like oh, that's new, I've never heard of that. The reality is anything you put in there, you're going to have to protect it. The cloud service provider is going to protect their own infrastructure. So we need to make sure that everything that we do sort of on-premise, we're pretty much doing the same thing online. Out in public cloud infrastructure. Anything that we're exposing, using things like easily guessable passwords. We've still got some very, very basic passwords that are being used, and brute force attacks extremely common. So we're going to keep on seeing those things. So if there's any capability there, and let's just use the example of public cloud, we can enforce things like multi-factor authentication and the like. Use it. Make it harder for the attacker. If we see that there's a brand new technique, again, sharing it in the community, I think we've actually learned that the more we share it, the better things are going to be, because we're actually forcing their hand somewhat the attacker to go back to the drawing board and think of a different way they're going to come back and launch an attack. Some people say that's counterintuitive, but I just then go, let's make that a little bit harder for them.
Yeah.
So that initial access is going to keep on sort of growing because we're putting more things out online and we're exposing more things too.
And they are literally looking for that low-hanging fruit. They don't want
Always.
to work hard, which is probably why they're in this business anyway.
Yep.
And the key one there is that backup and recovery process and testing those backups. We've kind of covered that. And the security controls that you've also mentioned. Now, we'll give Palo Alto Networks a bit of a plug in this because you've got quite a lot that in terms of the services and the capabilities that you provide. You're obviously a leader in this space. And obviously, Unit 42, this is well worth a read for anyone in the sector or that has to raise the risk profile to their board or senior executive. Just get them to start to read reports like this, and they will start to listen to you, I would imagine, or ask how they're going to be paying the ransom. I think that's always the first question of, are we going to pay or not? Are we ready? And if our data does get leaked, what's been our sort of risk posture and our profile? Can we explain to our stakeholders why this has happened and why we didn't pay and why our data is out and about? So look, Sean, thank you so much. We're top of the hour. I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you so much. I hope your flight went well this morning, or you got another one today.
No, thank you.
So I appreciate you taking the time with us once again. And I think I'm losing count how many times we've had you on. That's why I've grabbed that photo of you. That's last time you were on My Security TV, I think in Melbourne. But look, thank you so much for your time. Sean Duca, the Vice President, Regional Chief Security Officer for APJ with Palo Alto Networks, looking at the Ransomware Threat Report for 2021. Thanks, mate. I'll let you go. Appreciate it and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Cheers, Sean. Okay, very interesting. The report is on the marketplace, so you just go to mysecuritymarketplace.com and it's on the front page there. And as I just to finish off, the report of the day, other than the Palo Alto ransomware report, F5's 2021 State of Application Strategy Report was released yesterday. That's also on the marketplace. And it kind of covers, we covered the 5G networks and why 5G matters in the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine. So really it comes down to the applications and how applications are running now, and they need those networks to work properly. And there's a lot of sort of variations and sort of plugins for applications now. So there's a lot of interdependencies also increasing. So this is a very interesting report. AI-assisted business has tripled, according to this one. Applications continue to be modernized rapidly with API as a method of choice. The importance of SaaS-delivered security is rising as organizations work to unify security across distributed applications while managing more architectures than ever. I always think that complexity increases vulnerability. Architectural complexity, there you go, next one, makes multi-cloud availability an imperative, and edge deployments are increasing too. And telemetry will take us to the future, but now nearly everyone is missing the insights they need. Again, another good report from F5 on that one, and it's on the marketplace as a resource. So welcome to support the channel. Check out our merchandise. It's not just our T-shirts. We're starting to introduce other merchandise on there. If anything to do with cyber and cyber security is available on the mysecuritytv.shop, and you can check that out. So that's it from the marketplace and My Security TV. Thank you very much for our Tech and Sec Weekly. We'll be back on Tuesday afternoon looking at space and drone detection systems. So enjoy your day and have a great weekend.